Hey fearsome friends, tonight I'm stalking you with my stories, and no matter how many of them I read, I'm still always dumbfounded at how many crazy people there are out there. So let's get into it. It's time to get cozy, comfy, warm, and let your nightmares in. Now let me start by saying that I'm a 14-year-old male student from England. This happened to me back in September of 2020, when I had been decently acquainted with a girl called Olivia since the end of primary school. She wasn't a good-looking girl by any means, and at the time this happened, she was actually really fat. This will come into play later, was around 5'5", and had a really horrible sense of humour, basically the opposite of me. One day on the first week back after the UK's first lockdown, she started following me on Instagram. Of course I didn't find it anything more than normal at the time, but that was the start of a really strange, creepy ordeal. She would send me DMs most days, asking how I was, what I was doing, and that sort of thing, and it went on like this for around 10 days. And whilst I didn't find this too creepy at the time, I had no idea how much worse it would get. After a while, she was constantly DMing me, at least 10 times every few hours, and each one stranger than the next. She would start by saying how cool I was, which struck me as weird as I was pretty much the definition of a nerd, and still am today, and also how I was perfect. She would constantly remind me that she dreams about me every night, and she wants to run away with me too. That was when something finally clicked in my brain. I'd realized how strange this was getting, so I blocked her. For a few days it was quiet, and I thought it had worked, but that was before she made a new account. At first it was the same as the last time, just the same odd messages about her loving me. But then it changed. It changed to her going on rants about how nobody liked her, gee, I wonder why, and how she was going crazy without me. The weirdest was when she messaged me talking about how she was stress-eating everything she could find because she was going crazy over love. This was getting too much for me now, so I told my parents, who told me to put my Instagram account on private and tell them if anything else happened. Strangely enough, it worked. She had completely stopped everything, the creepy DMs, the new accounts, everything. Then fast forward a month or so, and it's the middle of the night. I was going up the hill I live on to the supermarket to get some things for Halloween, when I saw a girl around my age crossing the street towards me. I looked at her for 1 second before realizing that through the hood over her head, it was Olivia. I had been homeschooled by a private tutor for the last month to avoid her, so I was surprised I'd saw it was her. But I did. Instincts kicked in and I ran up the hill. I heard Olivia mumble, "Oh crap," under her breath, before attempting to run after me. Now I might have been a nerd, but I was kind of in good shape at the time, so I was able to get to the supermarket at least 30 seconds before her. I immediately went to an employee who thankfully stepped in before she'd got there, and she was extremely out of breath from running up the hill, maybe 50 meters. The employee grabbed her and went to a phone. He called the police and told them my story, mentioning a knife in her pocket, which I hadn't seen. During this time she was staring straight at me, and I could clearly see that she had gone mad. She had stuck to her word of eating everything she could find. As I could see, she had gained at least 3 stone. Her hair was longer and messier. Her clothes were so tiny you could see the bottom of her belly sticking out of the bottom of her hoodie, and she had a crazed, deranged look in her eyes. When the police came to take her away, she stared me straight in the face and said one of the most haunting things of my life. "Just so you know, I never loved you. You're lucky I'm so fat, because if I wasn't, I would have caught you and slit your throat." Thank God that was the last time I ever saw her. I started going back to school and my life slowly went back to normal. So if you learn anything from my story, let it be this. Never judge a book by its cover, because you never know if they will be a crazed psycho. Back in July 2018, me and my 3 best friends decided to go on a vacation to Barcelona. The 4 of us, all females, were 18 at the time and had just finished our freshman year of college. For context, we had planned this trip for several months, but the lazy asses that we were took our time before booking our flights and Airbnb. We eventually started our search in May, and if you have ever been to Barcelona, you might know it's already pretty late if you want to find an affordable and well-located summer accommodation. We ended up scrolling on several websites for days, as everything was way out of our budget. Then one of my friends finally found this very decent studio located near the Ramblas, a very touristy neighbourhood. The condo was actually located on a narrow street that was perpendicular to the main Rambla. You had to walk about 500 meters until you arrived at the sketchier end of this street where the flat was. It really didn't bother us as the building was pretty secure. You had to open the first front door that led to the streets, then you had to take the stairs to the second floor where you had a second door which required another key. Now this second door led to 3 condos, so we had a third and final key to our personal flat. This final door did not have any outside handle, which meant that if we were to leave without our keys, we would end up locked out. There was no outside handle on the balcony door either. You could only open the door from the inside. It might seem like a lot of detail, but it's important for what comes next. The day we checked in, we were pretty excited, despite our terrible exhaustion. We had been travelling for 15 hours at that point, so we decided to go smoke a cigarette on the balcony. Now the balcony next to ours belonged to our next door neighbours, who were a bunch of Italian boys who we'd only met at this very moment. They had been pretty loud throughout the stay, but we never thought too much of it. At last elements of context, our condo was disposed as follows. The front door led to the main room, which is where 2 of my friends were sleeping. The bed was on the left, and at the end of the room was the living room, which also worked as a kitchen and a bedroom, where my 3rd friend and I were sleeping. We had booked in for 5 nights, and as the young women that we were, our daily routine was pretty consistent. We would go clubbing every night, go home at around 4 a.m, pass out in our beds and wake up at 11. We'd visit the city up until 7 p.m. and then get ready to repeat. Our first 3 nights were awesome. We had some male friends who were staying in Barcelona too, so we'd met up with them, and it was fun. Yet the 4th night was rather creepy. We had gotten home at 4 a.m, screwed around for another hour, and fallen asleep by 5. Around 7:30, my friend who was sleeping with me in the living room, and who suffers from sleep paralysis, woke up as she felt something tickling her ankle. She opened her eyes and saw someone crouching at the end of the bed, with his hand on her ankle, as if he was looking for something under the bed. At this moment she was convinced that she was experiencing sleep paralysis again, but the fear made her sit on the bed and shout, "What the hell?" which rarely happens with sleep paralysis, as your muscles are often numb. The shouting woke me up, and I saw the guy too, and still half asleep I whispered, "Edward?" I think I had been dreaming about a friend of mine and confused this guy with him. The guy got scared, suddenly got up, stared at us and tiptoed away, saying, "Oops." He then walked back past the bed where my friends were dead asleep, and walked out the front door. My friend and I stayed up for a long time talking about what we had just experienced. Then we woke up the other girls and told them the story. We never knew how this guy broke into our flat. He hadn't stolen anything, even though we had ostentatiously left our credit cards, IDs, phones and cash on the table. But the only thing is, that night we didn't lock the front door either, but it was closed. So normally no one could open it, as there was no handle, unless someone had a key. We chose not to talk to the police about it because of this, as they could have told us that we were responsible for not locking the door properly. We also chose not to tell the landlord for the same reason, but also because we didn't want to ruin our last day there. We tried contacting our neighbours, the Italian guys, went to their flat and knocked, but they never opened the door. Looking back at it, we should have definitely done something about it, and we shouldn't have stayed there for another minute. But we were too young, I guess. We could never figure what the guy wanted, nor what he was looking for under the bed. None of it makes sense, to be fair. Why would someone come to someone's place uninvited to look for something at 7:30 while the occupants were asleep? I guess we'll never know. So I worked at a hardware store during high school, and we had a number of fairly regular customers. But there was one man in particular that was in his mid-30s that became a regular after I checked his items out one night. After a while, I would realize that I'd kept seeing him on my shift, and he would continually try to strike up awkward conversations with me and hold up the line until I told him I had to take care of other customers. Now, our registers were in front of a large glass window, so anyone walking outside could see who was working. He eventually started to wait outside the window and would tap on the glass to get my attention after leaving. Now, I rode my bike to work, and getting off late at night started to terrify me. One night when I was working alone, he asked me if he could have my number and if I was 18. When I told him that I wasn't, he asked for my birthday, to which I replied some arbitrary date in the distant future. I told my boss about this interaction, and from then on she made sure I never worked alone, and she would follow his ass any time he entered the store, to the point where he stopped coming in. So the next day of my fake birthday, or close to it, I couldn't remember, he came knocking on the glass again. It was busy and my boss wasn't around, so I tried to ignore him as best I could. And eventually I noticed that the knocking had stopped, so I could only assume he had made his way into the store. Very soon after, though, I was greeted by his face in front of my register. He handed me a plastic grocery bag and said, "Happy 18th birthday." I was so embarrassed. I took the bag and told him to please leave. When my friend and I opened up the bag after work, it contained 2 packages of fireworks and nothing else. It was really, really weird. I'm a female and was 16 at the time, and this story is from 2019 and 2020, when I started high school. I met Tom through my classmate, who was a goth. He had his own band and everyone considered him as someone who was dangerous. But to be honest, I found him to be the sweetest person I'd ever met. So what Tom's guitarist had told me about him, I thought was bogus. I assumed that if my friend was sweet, his friends must be sweet too, which in most cases was the truth. Tom was shorter than me. I'm 5'7", so it's not that uncommon in my case. He had really long blonde hair, and because of that many people had misgendered him. He was nice and funny, though he wasn't exactly the type of person that I would usually hang out with, as most of my friends are loud extroverts with a lot of energy. So me, my friend and Tom were going to the same school, and when I was talking with my friend, Tom would usually be there too. After a while, Tom and I started to spend more time alone, and we became close friends. Side note, I had told Tom that I had a crush, so he was more than aware that I was interested in someone else. But as time went by, my best friend started to notice that Tom was obviously interested in me. I just laughed it off and didn't think much of it, Me and Tom? Come on. But though I didn't believe them, I wanted to make sure that Tom knew where I stood in our relationship. And despite the fact that I'm a really cuddly and friendly person, I tried to not show him this kind of attention anymore. Months flew by and February came. My friends had pointed out some red flags about Tom, that he had been watching me and that he was magically appearing everywhere we went, following us around, etc. I insisted that what we had was established for good, and that we were just friends. Needless to say, though, that my friends were not big fans of his, so when he invited me to go shopping after school, I was like, yeah, sure. The day before said trip, he had texted me about how he was excited about it, etc., and offered me a lift home afterwards. I told him no, as I was okay with the bus. I live in the next town. But he insisted, and was so persistent in giving me a lift home, that my naive, though aggressive and assertive ass, wrote him a message saying, "Bitch, you right, I'll give you a ride home one more time, and we're not going anywhere." He finally stopped after that. I really hate guys who don't take no for an answer, and it was definitely the case here. The meeting was nice, but after the text thing it was weird. 15 minutes after we'd gotten to the shopping centre, I knew then that he wanted something more. I'm naive, not blind. So after some awkwardness, I announced that I had to go. I walked to the bus stop. He wanted to walk me there, and that was about it. Or at least that's what I thought. He got on the bus with me because apparently he was going the same way. But I knew that he lived in the other part of the city. Maybe he needed to do something there, I thought. Something was definitely off, so I got off the bus a few stops before mine and called my mum. But he got off too. I asked him why he was following me, and he said that he wanted to make sure I was getting home safely. Yeah, what the hell, dude? Do you think this is romantic or something? I told him to go home, but he was persistent. I'd already told him yesterday that I was okay with getting home alone, and he said, "But you're going home by yourself, what's the problem?" Now literally scared and really uncomfortable, I got that feeling that his intentions were not pure. I have read way too many true scary stories on Reddit. It was getting dark now, and I was alone with him in the middle of nowhere, and that's when he started to make his move. By this point I was starting to get more annoyed of him than scared. Now I'm tall, sporty, with a blue belt in boxing, so if he tried something I would absolutely beat the crap out of him. And also my voice is really loud, and I can scream louder than an ambulance siren. But then I remembered a meeting I'd had with some old creep a while back, who wanted to do you-know-what. He failed, don't worry, and I was frozen with fear for the first 10 seconds. I couldn't move or even make a noise. So I decided it wasn't necessarily the best place to start pushing him away, so we just waited silently. I would have definitely felt more safe alone than with him at this point. But then he started touching my back and my hair, and when I asked him to stop, he just said, "Aw, you're so cute when you're angry." Dude, no means no, and I told him that. But he started ranting on about how girls always say no, but they mean yes. No, they don't. I then realized it had become so dark that I needed to turn my flashlight on. He asked me if I was cold. I said I wasn't. But apparently we're talking about a guy who didn't take no for an answer. And so he hugged me tightly. I tried to push him away, but then I remembered that night when I was almost, you-know-what, and I again froze. I felt him sniffing my hair and neck, and his hands were tightly hugging me. He was way stronger than I thought originally, and I could feel his slow breath on my skin. "You really are perfect," he said after a while, and with a different voice than I'd ever heard before. It was deep. I felt like a rabbit caught by a predator, and began laughing hysterically and crying. But he was still holding and sniffing me. When my mum finally arrived, I ran to her car, that was thankfully parked away from the bus stop, so he couldn't have invited himself to the house even if he wanted to. When I got home, I cried my eyes out. I thought it was over. And after that, I definitely limited my time around him. He was still a friend of a friend, so I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. And then lockdown happened, so I thought that that was the problem solved. I had told my mum about what had happened, but she just gave me the, "He just likes you," and, "Oh, come on, boys will be boys." I was alone with my problem. He was now calling me a few times a day. I wouldn't answer, of course, and when I'd asked him why he was doing this, through text, he said that he wanted to talk because he missed my voice. I thought that ignoring him would eventually make him stop, and surprisingly it did. At least the texts and calls stopped. Fast forward to September when we were back at school. He was acting like he had before the bus stop incident. Pure, nice, and shy. My goth friend had been expelled from school at the time, and we kind of lost contact, so I couldn't talk about Tom with him. Maybe this was normal behavior for Tom. I don't know. I know some clingy people would totally do the same things as him, but only with the purest intentions. Yes, I am naive and dumb. And then lunch break came. After everyone from our table had left, only me and Tom stayed. I eat rather slow, and he was drinking his juice. "It's a nice thing we finish lesson at the same time on Thursdays," he said. "We can hang out, then maybe go ice skating when winter comes, go get some sushi or something." What? First of all, my school has a private lesson plan for each class, so you can't just check it on the website. The teacher needs to send it to you, and I hadn't given it to him, so how the hell did he know when I finished my classes? Second, I love ice skating, and had told him so over a year ago on the day we met. How could he have remembered? And finally, I had never told him that I liked sushi. Why would he ask me to go if he wasn't sure I liked it? A lot of people hate sushi. Even I only eat it occasionally with my friends. And then it hit me. My friend had told me all that time ago that he'd been following us. He knew I liked sushi because he'd seen us eating it, probably several times. Maybe I had told him after all, though, and had just forgotten. I tried to make excuses for him, but I started to feel so scared I couldn't move. Yeah, I answered awkwardly, trying to make my voice sound normal. How do you know? He started to look a little bit uncomfortable and changed the subject. Okay, this is way too suspicious. I told one of my best friends, Hannah, about this conversation, and she said, "Oh my God, yes, I remember now." So after that, I thought she'd for some reason sent him the lesson plan. She continued, "I met him today at the principal's office. He was taking our class plan. I thought it was pretty weird too. I wanted to tell you as well, since you guys are friends and all, but I forgot. Sorry." He what? I confronted him about it a few days later, and basically told him that we couldn't be more than friends, ever, as I liked someone else. I tried to make it as clear as I could that I didn't have romantic feelings towards him at all, etc., etc. But after my rant was over, he just stood there, and after a while said, "I knew about it," then looked at me. "You did like my touch, though. I saw you liked it. So why are you acting like this?" I told him that I didn't at all, and it made me very uncomfortable, and that even then I tried to push him away, but I couldn't, and if a girl says no, she means no. "Well," he said, "it seems like I am stronger than you after all. Good thing to know. We'll be happy that I won't use it on you. You're too pretty." We just stood there, and I was in shock. He was just looking at my reaction, when then, my next class had started, so I left. I looked back on my way, and he was still standing there, with this blank expression on his face. Then he looked up, and our eyes met, and he seemed sad and angry. After that we stopped talking for a while, though I would see him in weird places just staring at me, like in the building where I train karate or my bus stop. He never took this bus stop as he lived in a completely different direction, but thankfully this stopped as well after some time. But then my so-called best friend Hannah became friends with him, knowing what had happened between me and Tom. I was nearly begging her to stop asking him to hang around with us, but she didn't care, and every time our choir needed music help, she'd text him to help us. "Oh, come on, Asia," that's my name. "He's so good with guitar, he can totally help us." The second lockdown has begun now, and I don't know what to expect when I go back. The worst part is that I know deep down he's a good person. He'll get over his feelings for me eventually. At least I hope so. But I think it's just cruel for Hannah to ask him to hang out with me and her, because it's leading him on and messing with him. I know that she likes him, also not in a romantical way as far as I know. But come on, girl, don't do this to me. Can't you hang out with him alone? I don't know what to do. We haven't spoken in half a year, and he acts normal enough. We'd texted just once about music that I'd recommended to him back in September, and I'm happy that I had ended it before something bad happened. I hope that nothing bad will happen too. So Tom, I know that we will meet again, but let's just meet as normal friends and nothing more. This happened around 12 years ago when I was 14, and my sister was 12. It was during summer vacation, and we were hanging outside, just the two of us. It was midday, and we lived in a smallish town, where during weekdays it was pretty empty, because all the adults were at work. So we'd been messing around, picking flowers and other random crap, when we decided to cut through a massive field of undeveloped land on the edge of our suburb. It was technically a shortcut to get home, but it wasn't the best idea, because it was really bumpy, potted land, where other kids and teens had left all sorts of rubbish laying around. Well, our bad decision to walk this way came around and bit us on the ass. Now we hadn't made it very far across the field, when my sister encountered two bad things at once. First, some sort of twisted metal pierced right through her foam flip-flop and into her foot. Secondly, right after it happened, she shrieked, jerked, and twisted that ankle on the uneven ground. She was crying and howling, and I was worried. The metal hadn't gone too deep, and I was able to stop the bleeding with the hem of my shirt, but she couldn't walk anymore, obviously. Our parents weren't available and didn't know where we were, and this was before I had a cell phone. So my sister was still on the ground crying, and I was trying to calm her down, when suddenly something made me feel like looking up. It was the feeling of being watched, and out of the field and across the road, standing on the corner in the distance, was some random guy watching us. He was too far away for me to see him clearly, but I could tell for sure that he was blonde, probably an adult, and dressed too warmly for July. He was all alone, stock still, just staring at us. I've always been a bit skittish, so I looked back at my sister and basically said to get on my back, because I was carrying her home and we were leaving right now. I had to carefully pick my way through this stupid field in my own crappy flip-flops, with my crying sister on my back. Luckily she was tiny, but I was no linebacker either. It had rained a day ago, and the field had puddles of slimy water in the low spots, so we were both kind of wet, from her falling when she got hurt. I swiveled back to check if he was still watching us, and he was. But not only was he watching us, he'd crossed the road and entered the field. Now he was standing stock still again, and just watching. Ice in the veins doesn't describe it. It was one of the scariest moments of my life up to that point. My sister looked when I looked, saw my face, and started crying even harder. I just shook her a bit on my back and whispered something like, "Stop it, we need to concentrate on getting us home. Watch him and tell me if he starts following again. Just be quiet." So that's what we did. I started walking again as fast as I could without getting hurt, and my sister watched him whilst I carried her. After less than a minute, she whispered to me that he was following again. "How fast?" I asked. "Just walking," she replied. "Is he watching us?" "Yes." I told her to tell me if anything changed, and kept going. I stomped through puddles I couldn't see into when I had to, hoping there was nothing sharp in them. I lost a flip-flop in the mud, but just kept going. We were about 3/4 of the way through the massive field, when my sister whispered what I least wanted to hear. He was speeding up. I turned us right around so we were facing him head-on, and as loud as I could, I yelled something like, "Hey, we see you! Go away and leave us alone or I'll call the cops." But nothing. He'd stopped again when I stopped, but gave no sign whatsoever that he'd heard me. I turned us around again and kept going, and my poor little sister was shaking like a leaf and just saying my name over and over again. It was awful, and there was nothing I could do but keep going. Eventually he started following us again, but at a slow pace. I finally made it into our suburb, out of the muddy field and onto solid concrete, and told my sister to hold on as tight as she could, and booked it. I was running with her on my back as fast as I could, and we thankfully couldn't see him anymore, but didn't know what he was doing or where he was. I was going to make it to our house, or die trying. Every muscle hurt from carrying her so far. My bare foot was all scratched up from the road, but I didn't stop. I kept moving, with my sister looking out behind us. It felt like my heart was going to burst, and the fear and suspense was awful. After what felt like forever, I made it to our house, ran across the yard, up the drive and put down my sister, who started crying again. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely use my key. But we made it in safely, called my mom, and she had us lock every door and window and came rushing home. Nothing happened after that. He never found us and we never saw him again. I have no idea who he was or why he was messing with us like that, but it gives me chills to this day, the way he'd stop when I stopped, and the way he ignored my yelling. I don't know what he wanted or what he was doing, and quite honestly, I don't want to know. This happened over 1.5 years ago, but I only recently figured I could probably share the story. I'm a UK teen, and at Christmas in 2014, I got an Xbox One, and I still use it almost every day to talk to friends. In 2019, I rounded up a game of Rocket League, which I've been playing since 2016, and my team won. But one of the players on the opposing team messaged me with trash talk, so I just told him to quit whining and blocked the account. But then during the next 15 minutes, 3 more accounts, all with peculiar usernames, messaged me similar things to the guy I'd just blocked. Now I know for a fact that lots of these accounts were terminated for spam a while after the incident. I'll share the gamer tags I remember, but be aware that there's a chance that new users have made accounts with these names since they were terminated. The names themselves were, I'm pretty sure, automatically generated by Xbox, because they all had 15 characters of 2 words and numbers, which leads me to believe that they were all created very recently. The original account that messaged me was called something like Erotic Radar 2084, or something like that. So for convenience sake, I'll refer to him as Radar. Anyway, all of these accounts were, without a doubt, linked to the original in some way. The first 5 to 10 accounts all trash-talked me, and besides radar, I had never heard of these people. So one after the other, I blocked the accounts after sending a message or two. But then things started to get creepy. After another 15 minutes of no more messages, an account messaged me a photo taken by a phone, and it was a pair of shoes on the ground. Clearly the person who'd taken it was walking somewhere, and the next few accounts progressively sent photos of the same shoes moving. Then one of them sent a photo of the photographer being in my area. The user was stood by a sign which had the name of a road I knew well, because it was very close to my home. The photo was either taken by someone else, or radar set the camera up to take a photo after he'd set it down. I could see up to their knees, standing next to the sign that was probably a foot off the ground. I immediately blocked and reported the account, and at this point I began to feel very scared, making sure I wasn't being watched in that very moment. I was then messaged by around 30 more accounts, a few of which sent messages in binary and Morse code. The trash talk had ended, but now I was getting coded threats and creepy questions. Obviously I didn't respond to a single one and blocked and reported them all. The messages themselves said things like, "Let's play," and "Aren't you going to say hello?" The final account that messaged me sent one final photo of a frying pan with smashed glass on it. Fortunately though, it wasn't because they'd smashed my window. It was probably just to scare me more. And then they vanished, and I wasn't messaged by the strange accounts again. Now firstly, I know that there is a limit, much less than 30 to 40, for how many accounts you can have on an Xbox. In addition to this, if you receive too many bans on too many accounts, you receive a console ban. So the question must be asked, how many people were involved in this besides radar? Did they have multiple consoles, or multiple people working with them? So to give you an idea of the story, this happened about a week ago. I've been debating on whether to post this on here or not, but I finally decided to do so. I feel like I need to get it off my chest for peace of mind. For context, I am a 25-year-old woman who is 3 months pregnant. The two people involved in this incident are myself and my brother-in-law, who is 19. For the sake of this story, I'll call him Jack. Now Jack is very street smart, and on top of that a brown belt in some martial art, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu I believe, so he definitely knows how to hold his own in any difficult situation. He is the outspoken younger child in his family, as compared to my husband's soft demeanour. Being only 2 siblings, my husband and Jack are very close. Jack currently lives with my husband and myself. I live in a small town in California, and the 3 of us live in a small 2-bedroom apartment. It isn't special or anything, but considering how close the 3 of us are and all the fun we have, it's home. The only downside is that while we have good neighbours and everything else, the neighbourhood isn't that good. There's a lot of gang-related crimes that have taken place over the years, and drug abuse is common on the streets. But anyway, on to the story. Now being pregnant, I have had the usual weird cravings, and on that particular night I was dying for some pickles. Naturally we didn't have any at our place, so the plan of action was to go and get them at 1 a.m. Now there is a commercial area about a 25-minute walk from our apartment complex with a huge Walmart, so that is our go-to store for anything we needed. My husband was away on a business trip for the weekend, so Jack was on my beck and call for everything. I told him about my craving, and he got ready to leave right away. But not wanting to stay home alone at that time of night, I decided to go along with him. I figured the fresh air would be good for me, and I felt like I could use a walk, so off we went. It was a bit chilly that night, and naturally I didn't realize it, so I had to make do in a tank top and yoga pants. That is, until Jack gave me his jacket. We had a really pleasant walk all the way to the store, talking about everything and nothing, and enjoying the walk in general. We got to Walmart around 1:30 a.m. and spent around a half hour there. Now, since I frequently visit the store a lot, I am friendly with a few of the employees working there, so I spent some time talking to them as well. I got my pickles and a few other groceries that were needed. I also got a few things off my maternity checklist, in case I didn't forget to do so later. Jack got a few things that he needed, and saying our goodbyes, we left. I'll admit I'm very naive, which I think is probably because of my sheltered upbringing. We were at the edge of the parking lot of the entire commercial area when we crossed a group of 4 greasy guys in their late 20s hanging around. I caught them staring, but since I had just started showing, I didn't make much of it. There weren't many cars around either, since it was very late at night. Jack and I started our journey back once again, cracking jokes and messing around with each other. He made a joke about naming my baby after him if I had a son, and we were just goofing around. Little did I know how quickly that would change. Only a few minutes into our walk back home, Jack's demeanor suddenly changed. Now, I've known Jack since he was 12, and I've always known him to be very laid back and carefree. But his breathing became very erratic, and he was laughing way too loud at anything I was saying. He was twirling around like he was dancing every few seconds. I thought he was just messing around with me, as I'm a dance instructor, but something just wasn't right with the way he was acting. Then all of a sudden he started laughing and said, "I dare you to shuffle sideways across the road to the other sidewalk." I thought this was very weird, but since I was in a good mood, I thought why not, and just went for it. Jack followed right next to me doing a weird dance, which didn't really make any sense. I started laughing at him when we started walking again, on the other side of the road this time. But any signs of discomfort he was showing earlier had all disappeared, so I figured he only wanted to make our tedious walk home entertaining. "Okay, now back to our side of the road," he said. I looked at him weirdly, and he had this wide grin on his face. Once again, I couldn't say no to him, so we did the same thing back. We were both laughing like crazy, and I was in an even better mood than earlier. But this time, however, I noticed that same group of 4 guys walking about 30 yards behind us. I thought it was a bit strange, but didn't think of it being too strange. Maybe they were just going home too, I thought. About 10 minutes had passed since we left Walmart, and we had arrived near a residential area. Not apartment buildings, but typical California homes, with large backyards, etc. This particular residential area was to our left, and for our apartment we had to go straight for at least another 2 blocks. Now this is where it starts to get creepy and straight up terrifying. Instead of going straight like we were supposed to, Jack challenged me to a race. We'd turn left on the end of the block, run that length of houses, and come back. I found this very strange, but he was adamant about it. And there was something different this time. He still had that weird laugh going on, but his eyes told a different story. He looked desperate, as if he really wanted me to say yes. I'd noticed those guys were still strolling behind us, which at that point were alarm bells in my head. I agreed to the race, and he gave me a head start. I could see those guys staring at us out of the corner of my eye. They just stopped and were simply looking in our direction, making me feel very uneasy. Jack made a big show of counting down from 3, and we took off. Literally 5 seconds into our race, once we were out of sight, Jack put his hand over my mouth and dragged me to the house on our left and into the bushes. I was about to scold him for cheating when he hissed at me that we were being followed. The terrified look on his face was all I needed to see to know he was right. I felt my heart sink down into my stomach, and I could feel myself throwing up any second as tears welled up in my eyes. There was no time for any of that though, because we heard voices almost instantly. Jack pushed me further under the bushes, and he positioned right next to me, both of us pretty concealed by now. Sure enough, all four of them had turned left onto the street, and they just stood there looking around. The street lights were fairly dim, so it was pretty dark. I didn't know knocked-up bitches could run that fast. Another guy mentioned something about how he thought the kid was onto them. What he said next sent shivers up my spine. I've got my knife here for that bitch. She can't resist what I say with a knife on her throat. We'll dump the kid somewhere. Don't worry about that, POS. I could feel my throat closing up. It got difficult to breathe by the second. But it wasn't over yet. Their leader decided to look around for us. They split up and two of them came in our direction. My heart came all the way up into my throat as I literally froze. The fear of getting caught was like ice running through my veins. One of them came up and stood right next to where we were hiding and started smoking a cigarette. The other three were nearby, and they were going through the neighborhood looking for us. I was sure that the guy closest to us would find us, as he was only a few steps away. Jack turned to look at me, and I could see the fear on his face. He raised his finger to his mouth, signaling me to be extra quiet. The smoker guy was pacing around us slowly. And luckily it was so dark that played to our advantage. After what seemed like an eternity, but what actually was only 30 minutes, they regrouped in the middle. One of them made a call, telling someone to bring the car around, and another 5 minutes had gone by when the car finally arrived, and the men, all looking pissed off, drove away. It was too dark to clearly get the number plate, but I made a mental note of the model and colour of the car. We waited for a while before emerging from the undergrowth and brushed ourselves off. I couldn't hold it in any longer and burst into tears. And Jack too, with glistening eyes, hugged me, but he didn't for long. He wanted to get home as quickly as possible before those men had any chance of coming back. We got our grocery bags, which were all muddy now, and made our way back home. I felt like they would pull up behind us any second. But luckily though, we made it back without any further issues. I collapsed on the couch the minute we entered and double-checked the locks. I was sobbing my eyes out and trying not to throw up, and Jack was trying to keep it together. But I felt like he would start crying any minute as well. I honestly felt so stupid and ashamed. Here I was, 6 years older than my brother-in-law, who looks at me as the older sister he never had, and he was the one consoling me. We stayed that way for a while when he told me to get some rest. It was almost 3 a.m., and I didn't have the mental capacity to do anything else, so I just went to my room and passed out on the bed. I had a load of missed calls when I woke up from my husband. Jack had called him and told him what had happened. He told me he would be coming back that very day, which I was very happy about. I also told Jack how grateful I was for him being with me. We have since tried to move on from the real-life nightmare, but I still feel like something is bothering me. My apartment is on the 4th floor and has a clear view of the road outside. Now I don't know if it's my mind playing tricks on me, but I'm fairly certain I've seen those guys coming and hanging around the apartment complex at night. I've also seen them driving slowly around in what I'm sure is the same car that I saw that night. I have never feared for my life or felt in any sort of danger the way I've felt these past few days. We filed a police report, but we haven't heard anything so far. So that's my story. I'll keep you updated, I guess, if anything else comes up, and I could really use suggestions as to what I should do next. What still terrifies me, though, is the fact if I had gone alone that night, or if Jack didn't feel like going, I would probably have been assaulted or worse, and nobody would have even known what had happened. So I've been living alone in a foreign country for a year already. The last few months I've been taking a ferry to get about, because the metro is usually crowded, stressful, and in COVID times is a nope for me. So the ferry I found is always the best option. At least that's what I thought until this week. On Monday, a random guy, probably in his mid-30s, sat down next to me in the ferry and tried to start a conversation. Now, I'm not good with the language yet, so I told him that I didn't know what he was saying. But he carried on regardless and showed me his phone. He had just taken a picture of me. I asked him to delete it, but he didn't understand, so I began to ignore him in an attempt to leave me alone, which he did. Then on Tuesday, I'd noticed that the guy was on the ferry again, but this time he greeted me and called me by my name, which of course surprised me, since I didn't know who he was. He sat next to me again and was talking non-stop, but this time he went way over the top and tried to hug me. Luckily, a woman nearby could see what was going on and placed herself between us, pretending to be my friend. When Wednesday rolled around, I used the metro instead of the ferry this time, so I had no interferences. But on Thursday, I decided to take the ferry, and the guy was there again, but this time he sat far away. When the ferry reached the other side, I noticed the guy was following me, so I changed route and went to a bus stop, which is just next to the ferry port. As it was late at night, there weren't many people around, and I was scared, so I sat in the bus shelter, as there was a couple waiting there, which made me feel safer. But the stalker came and sat next to me and suddenly grabbed my arm, whilst telling me to, "Come, come," and trying to drag me away. I resisted as much as I could as I pleaded for help from the couple next to me. They called the police and I made a statement. Now you remember I'd mentioned that on the Monday he had taken a photo of me. Well, it turned out that he was possibly doing the same to other girls. The police had asked for his phone, and surprisingly he handed it to them with no problems, like he was sure nothing was going to happen to him. But when the police checked his phone, they found pictures of me. But not just from Monday. This guy had been taking pictures of me for months, and not just in the ferry, but also in the parking lot and even outside my home. And with my pictures were the photos of a different girl, which we believe he had been following for months as well. The worst thing about this whole situation, though, is that after I'd filed the report to the police, they couldn't do anything because the guy hadn't hurt me. So right now I'm looking for a new place to live. Be careful, all of you. These creeps are everywhere. This happened about 12 years ago, and it still gives me the creeps. It happened to a friend and I, both 15 at the time, while we were vacationing in the Badlands of South Dakota. I went with my friend, I'll call her Ash, on her family vacation to visit the Badlands and Mount Rushmore. We stayed in a pretty touristy area on a busy street. Being teenagers, we begged her parents if we could go off alone to play mini-golf. It was about 4 blocks down from our hotel, and we insisted on walking there alone. Her parents agreed as long as we were back before dark. We played the first half of our game and nothing eventful happened. Then we noticed a man, probably in his mid-20s or early 30s, just following us around the course. We didn't think much at first, but we noticed he was staring a lot and wasn't playing the game, just lingering around wherever we were. Finally he approached us, asking if we had seen a wallet anywhere. He'd said he'd lost it while playing earlier in the day and must have dropped it somewhere nearby. We told him we didn't see one, but we'd turn it in if we did, and we thought that would get him to leave us alone. But he didn't. He kept asking where we were from, what grade we were in, who was with us, etc. We didn't engage much in the conversation and kept shooting looks at each other like, let's get out of here. He seemed to pick up on it and left us alone. We finished playing and it was just starting to get dark. And as we exited the mini golf course, we saw the man, now with 4 other men, sitting on a park bench across the street. We stayed on our side of the street and headed back to the main strip, only one right turn away. But as we started walking, the 5 men got up, crossed the street, and stopped ahead of us like they were going to talk to us or stop us from getting by. Ash said loudly that she forgot her ring and we needed to go back to the mini-golf course. So we turned around and ran back into the building, not really knowing what to do next. This was before we had cell phones. Then a man, looked to be about 17 to 18, approached us with his 2 friends. They were playing mini-golf right behind us and had just finished their game. He told us they'd noticed the men following us and saw them approaching us when we left. He offered us a ride to avoid them, which we accepted, probably not the best decision looking back, and he drove us the few minutes back to our hotel. It's certainly not the creepiest thing I've read here, but I always wonder what the intentions of those men were and if that teenager possibly saved us. I'd never even got his name, but Ash and I referred to him as an angel wearing jeans because it was part of a comedy skit we really liked at the time. This happened in the early 2000s in Bulgaria, and I was probably in the 1st grade, or a year younger. I am from a medium-sized town, perfect for raising children, and crime is pretty much unheard of. You can even sleep outside on a bench and nothing would happen to you. One weekend, some family friends from a nearby town came to visit, and my parents and I decided to take them to the park. Now it is important to let you know that all of the parks in my town are located right on the edge of it, so there are actually parks with forests. The park that we went to runs alongside a river, so it is a very narrow alleyway, but a very long one. And on one side there is the river, and on the other there is a thick forest and the cliffs. At that time I didn't like that park so much because it was a very long walk, and you had to walk a lot to get to the end of it. So like most kids, I got bored of walking with my parents and the other family members, as they were just talking grown-up stuff, and I didn't want to listen anymore. So I decided to run off ahead, and by ahead I mean out of sight of my parents. Keep in mind that this is a one-alley park, which you walk only straight forward with slight curves due to the river, so I had gone pretty far. Now usually in this park there are always people, and it is quite crowded on the weekends, but since it was summer, most people were on family vacations, and it was surprisingly empty. I couldn't see anyone in a straight line in either way, when suddenly I started hearing something in the forest. It was pretty loud too, as on the other side was the river, and that itself was pretty loud. I stopped walking and stared into the forest, when I noticed that the bushes were moving, and the movement was coming in my direction. I was still pretty clueless as to what was happening. That is until I saw a man with long hair, a band across his forehead, and dressed like a hunter with an air rifle on his back. He was running at full speed towards me. I felt like freezing on the spot, but there wasn't time, so I just started running in the opposite direction and screaming my lungs out for my parents, hoping that they could hear me. But because of the river, I doubt that anyone could have heard me from 100 meters away. I remember looking back and seeing him still chasing me, and I thought that was the end for me. I was imagining how he would catch me and drag me into the forest, never to be seen again. It felt like what was happening was lasting an eternity, but I finally saw my parents and our family friends. My face was red, I was crying and snotting like crazy, and barely breathing. The hunter also stopped running after he'd seen my parents and the others, and I remember my parents started screaming at him, asking him what the hell he was doing. I don't remember what he'd said exactly, but I was just relieved that it was over. I do remember him shaking his head and saying, though, "I did nothing wrong, I was only trying to help him." The weirdest part about this, though, was that there was no game in that park. It was a park after all, and the forest that he was hiding in is 50 meters max in width before the cliffs begin, so it's impossible to have any game there, since there are always people walking. You can see wild foxes, but that's about it. You need to go beyond the park and out into the forest to hunt game. Also, it's highly illegal to carry a firearm out in public like that. We have very strict laws on firearms, and only the police and military personnel are allowed to carry them. I don't know anyone who owns a gun. Civilians are allowed to register only air guns for hunting, but no hardcore weapons, of course. You aren't allowed to carry them in a park where there are people, only in regulated zones for hunting game. We didn't report it afterwards. It was too much of a hassle. This was the first and last time something like this has ever happened to me, thankfully, and I haven't developed fear from that place, which is great. Even now when I go back to my town, I go running in that park after midnight, and I'm perfectly fine. So when I was in high school, I always spent my time in the art classrooms, as it was one of the few things that made me happy. Pottery was my one true love during high school. I made bowls, cups, teapots, whatever, and in my blissful ignorance I was sure that everyone in my class were nice and genuinely kind people. And for the most part I was right. I'd befriended most of them, or at least kept on friendly, positive terms, but pretty much all the time I had my headphones in and was zoned out on the pottery wheel or another art project that was due. Now I'd made the mistake of befriending a junior boy, who was a sophomore, called Isaac. Isaac seemed nice and normal. You know how sometimes people seem a little bit off and that's why people give them a chance? Well, that wasn't the case. Either that or I was too dumb to see the red flags. He was kind and helpful to everyone, and it gives me the heebie-jeebies to say this, but in the beginning I actually had a crush on him. Fortunately though, I had reserved myself to not dating due to some soul-crushing insecurities, so I never really shared or pursued my romantic feelings with anyone, not even my closest friends. However, midway into our first semester, I started to get the creeped out feelings. I would catch him looking at me, then he'd smile and wave, so I tried not to think too much of it. But then I noticed how he seemed to always just be there to make conversation. If I mentioned being interested in something, even the slightest bit, he would go out of his way to learn everything about it, or even giving me gifts related to it. He ended up giving me a copy of a movie franchise that I was interested in. I was too anxious to refuse it, and ended up never watching it. Why? Because I didn't want to encourage any more conversation with him than I had to. But things weren't too bad yet. I had no clue he was stalking me. I just thought maybe he liked me and was a little weird about it. My memory is a little foggy at this point, because this is when I realized that there was something really wrong with this guy. So our semester final was coming up, and we had a very special project that I still hold dear to my heart, but it was rather unique, so I don't want to share the details. I will say, though, that I poured my heart into it, and could not be happier to this day with how it came out, which is the only good thing in this story. Now, after the final, we all stood together with our projects for a group picture, and Isaac and a close friend of mine stood next to me, who as well had picked up on how creepy Isaac had gotten, way before I had. Now I'm going to mention I had an ED, and I am non-binary, and at the very least looked like an underweight tomboy lesbian. Short hair, stretched ears, a flannel and a binder to hide my chest. Even for my small town, how did more people not guess I was queer? But anyways, that is important because I was very insecure about how feminine my figure was, and I did not take compliments well. So we were all standing to get our picture taken, and while our teacher was figuring everything out, Isaac turned to me and said, "You look really nice today." I smiled and nodded and thanked him politely in reply. But it didn't end there. He proceeded to tell me that he liked my shirt and that it looked really good on me. My smile dropped and I said something I can't remember, to try and deflect the comment, but he just smiled and leant into me and said, "Don't say that, you're beautiful, don't you know?" Red flag, red flag, red flag. Me being me, I was terrified, uncomfortable and frozen to the spot. But luckily my friend had been watching the whole time right beside me. Isaac continued, "You're so shy, it's really cute." At that point my friend interrupted and yelled, "Anyway," and physically moved me to the other side to take my place. Was I about to cry? Yes. Did I? Also yes, but later in the bathroom. She asked me if I was okay and I nodded, but her girl brain deduced that I was actually not okay, and from there on out I actively started avoiding him. And he noticed. Now I don't remember if this next part happened in my sophomore year or junior, so this might not be entirely accurate time-wise, but let's say the new year had started. I got into our AP art class and figured out my schedule, reluctantly said hi to Isaac and everyone else, and soon it was business as usual. Travelling dead-eyed from one classroom to another, very quickly I noticed that any classes I had on the first floor, Isaac was always there to chat me up. I would smile politely and walk as quickly as I could to my next class, but it felt like he was always there. Then it happened. I was in the art room working on the wheel with a group of others when he came in and either knelt or sat across from me. He would always try to talk to me while I was throwing on the wheel, even when I had headphones in. And he started to work his way into asking me out, in front of everyone. Now I'm very familiar with people trying to get you to do something you don't want to in a public setting, in hopes that you will say yes as to not make a scene. But I was very tired of being polite, even though everyone else could tell I was uncomfortable. So I was thinking maybe we could... No. And that was one of the first times I'd ever said no to someone in my entire life, and I thought I was going to get murdered for it. He freaked out, and I honestly don't remember what happened afterwards. I just remember I ended up on the other side of the classroom, with his friend physically dragging him into another room to put him in his place. His friend came back out and asked me if I was okay, telling me that he was sorry for Isaac's outburst. I don't even remember what I said. I just know that I wasn't in the room when Isaac returned. After that, I really noticed the fact that he had been following me, this whole damn time. I had made a few more upperclassmen friends who picked up on it as well, which I am so grateful for, but they couldn't always be around. He followed me from class to class, sometimes trying to talk to me, sometimes following behind me, sometimes walking right next to me the entire time. He would find me in the cafeteria where I had the horrible luck of not sharing it with anyone who knew, and he would wait for me to leave the school and follow me to my bus. Eventually I decided that I was going to tell my dad, as I'd had enough. I thought if anyone could scare this guy into not looking in my direction ever again, it would be him. The guy who's head chef and bartender at the restaurant he works at. The guy who throws out rowdy drunks and beats the crap out of a dude who tried to sucker punch him after trying to bail on his check. This mofo scared all of my friends. And only by accident. He should be able to scare this boy for sure. Except when I told him about it, he didn't believe me. He said to me later that he didn't think I was serious and thought I was just exaggerating. So, failing that, I told my counsellor instead. "Oh, but Isaac is such a nice boy. He's just a little awkward." And then I told my art teacher. Some people just show emotions differently. I can't do anything about that. Cool. I had a few friends who could keep him away from me a few times a week, but absolutely no adults to help me. So I stopped going to the art room outside of class, and I stopped going to lunch, and then class. And the only time he wasn't there watching me was when I lost him in the crowd of kids and hid in the bathroom until the bell rang. I cut across the road to get to the buses, which I continuously got yelled at for, but it was the only way I could get away from him. He'd never laid a hand on me, thank God, but the mental games were exhausting. I was paranoid, tired and anxious. I found out how to get into the art room, though, when no one was there. Upper-class art students were notorious for just always being in the art room. It was technically 3 connecting rooms. The main entrance was the storage area, which led to the regular classroom, and out the side was the ceramics room with another door. So being the evolving burnout I was, I snuck in early morning, unlocked the ceramics door, which was always supposed to be locked, and when my teacher was teaching a lower class or just wasn't there, I would sneak in. I finally felt like I had my space back, and for a while I actually thought things were getting better. Have you ever sat in a public bathroom for 6 hours before? It's bloody awful. So I was so happy to have the art room back. I would throw my backpack down, pull my hair back, blast my music, and just vibe. Eventually I got pretty comfortable with going into the rest of the art room, when one day, of course, I came out to clean a few paintbrushes and see him walking through to talk to our teacher. He clocked me right away, so I went back into the ceramics room alone, like the dumbest final girl from a horror movie. Almost immediately he was shutting the door behind us, and I was shaking, just hoping he would leave me alone. He started to speak. "Where have you been? I don't see you anymore. You're hard to find. Do you hate me? Do you hate me that much?" Well, at least I really was hiding from him if he couldn't find me. I don't remember if I'd said anything back to him. I just remember everything felt like it was in slow motion, and he seemed really close to me. I think I said that I had to go, then I booked it out of there and into the nurse's office. Come to think of it, I should have told the nurse, or my history teacher, or our security guy. They had more sympathy on their left pinky than the entire rest of the staff put together. After that I really didn't go anywhere, unless someone was with me, and even then I'd felt him staring at me. Without fail I could pick him out of the crowd, watching me. He wouldn't smile, or wave, or even avert his eyes, and I was convinced that something bad would happen if I was ever alone with him again. I didn't bother telling anyone anymore, because every adult turned me down and dismissed me. Hell, my own dad didn't even believe me. The last time that I'm aware that he saw me was the end of my junior year. The seniors were all out of school early, like always, and he had stopped in for something as I was skipping class and wandering the halls. Because that class was led by a homophobic racist that talked down his nose at me and made nasty comments at all the girls, I had my headphones in and was swinging the hall pass around when I saw him walking towards me and waving. I immediately turned around and basically ran up the stairs to the 2nd floor. He called my name, then yelled it, and yelled something else before finally yelling, "What, you're just never going to talk to me again?" And, yeah, I never did. I know it's not as intense as what others have gone through, but it's the mind games and the lack of knowing that still keeps me up at night and gives me nightmares. What else did he do that I wasn't aware of? How long did he really follow me? How long did he keep tabs on me after he graduated, if he did at all? What if he never stopped? High school was hell for me, and the teachers were demons. Now it's hard for me to write this because it has only been a year since it stopped. It started in 2014, and it happened in my home country of Sweden, when I went to an art school for a summer course as a form of daily activity. The people at this art school were some of the worst people I have ever met, and that included me, because I was kind of a thrash back then too. I was 21 years old and had little experience of the real world. I had gone 2 extra years of school because of switching majors and taking an extra year on my second choice, so I was literally on my first year of independence. I also have a light form of autism and didn't receive schooling until I was 12, which made me a bit more slowly developed mentally during high school. I'm all caught up now though. But basically, I was a 21-year-old with very little experience in life. The people I met at the art school were not, let's say, the highest of achievers. They were some of the meanest and most terrible people I have ever met. They treated each other, and me, awfully, as well as the teachers. But I was quite the little turd too. In fact, I feel like being around those people also made me worse. What started the stalking was an incident involving acrylic paint. It was going to be thrown away, so some of us took some of the paint so it wouldn't go to waste, and I finally took the remaining paint. Well, it was over that this girl showed up, and her name was Anna, and this is how she introduced herself. My art teacher was pushing these big tables on a trolley through the narrow passageway of the art hall, and Anna, dressed in expensive designer clothes, stood in her way. My art teacher, not fearing anything, screamed, "Move it!" And Anna snapped towards her with this crazy look in her eyes and shouted, "Excuse me? Do you know who I am? I'm a famous woman." My art teacher, not impressed, responded with, "Okay, famous woman, move it." That was how we learned of Anna, the famous artist. She then proceeded to have all the terrible people of my class schmooze over her and treat her like a celebrity. But her real reason for being there was because of her paint. So the great hunt began. I was roped into it, and my initial plan was to just give her back her paint so she could be off. Except during the hunt I got these terrifying red flags. She kept sniffing the paint of other people to see if they were hers. Apparently she had poured some kind of oil into the paint so she could sniff her way to where they were. During the hunt she admitted that she had been put into treatment for the criminally insane because she had stalked a previous schoolmate that she thought had stolen paint from her. She even showed a CCTV video of her old schoolmate pulling a suitcase behind her, saying that's where she had the paint that she stole. I asked her how she got the video, and she said that her dad had connections with the local government, which had gotten the video from one of the local government cameras, which is illegal for a layman to get access to. During this time she even showed me the court document, which she had saved as a PDF on her phone. During this time she also admitted that she had been sending messages to a famous artist in Örebro because a voice from heaven told her to do it, and that he was destined to help her with her career. Anna also thought that staring wide-eyed made her more attractive, like the kind of stare where you can't see any of the eyelids at all. So while she was saying all this, she had this crazy-eyed look on her face. I was actually terrified of her and couldn't figure out a way of handing back the paint, so she ended up threatening to have the principal fired if she couldn't search every room for it. And when she did find all of her paint, she put it in one of the schoolrooms and said that she would pick it up when she wanted to. She said that she would come every year during the art exhibit to check if her paint was still there, and that she would sue the school if she found it missing. She was a crazy person, end of story. Right? Wrong. Oh, how I wish. About 2 years later, I enrolled in a 1-year basic art program at the school, and I had completely forgotten about this crazy person. At one point we were cleaning out the art rooms, and her paint was brought up again, and it would again be thrown away. Me, not remembering that crazy famous artist, took a nice crimson bottle for myself, while others took some of the not ruined colours for themselves. Then as we all tried to continue with our lives, the crazy lady one day returned and started sniffing all the paints. I didn't recognize her at all and had forgotten how dangerously deranged she was. I had even forgotten that I had the crimson colour from her paint collection, so when she started interrogating me for why the paint smelled like hers, I didn't know what to say. She also smelled her paint at some other girl's table and was harassing her as well. Now, thinking that this was all more fuss than it was worth, I threw away the crimson paint. It had started to go off anyway, and that is when everything went to hell, and crazy-eyed Anna became my stalker. When she found out that I had thrown away the paint, she became convinced that I had re-enrolled at the art school specifically to steal it. She started convincing a bunch of gullible, and to be honest, low-achieving people this was true, and I started being harassed. It started with a physical attack. I was painting alone in the evening, minding my own business, when this huge brute ran into me, tackled me to the floor and hit and kicked me. While this was happening, crazy-eyed Anna was fake crying in the corner, but I could see on the floor how she went from fake crying into gleefully smiling as I was being kicked and hit. Another girl she had recruited picked up and smashed my phone, breaking it. As the guy stormed off and the second girl followed, I stumbled to my feet and asked Anna why she had done this, and the answer she gave me made me realize what kind of person she was. "So you will know that I can hurt you if I want." That is what she said. I later asked the brute why he had attacked me, and he said that he hated people who stole. This guy is now training to become an art teacher. I fear for those children. I had bruised my ribs, but was not allowed to go to the hospital because the principal didn't want to get involved. And since my phone was broken, I couldn't call for an ambulance, so it took so long to get to the hospital that the outside signs of the abuse had healed. During this time, crazy Anna started wearing a crimson jacket wherever she went. I asked her why she was wearing it, and also said she looked pretty, thinking that talking nicely to her would start a friendly conversation to maybe smooth everything over. Well, Anna is not like normal people, and does not think like normal people. Her response was that she wanted me to think of her every time I saw this colour, and she said that she had seen it work in a movie. She then added, "I am more beautiful than you will ever be." Wherever she went, she had a horde of schmoozers around her, all thinking she was some kind of famous fancy artist. But eventually she had to leave the school, and I thought I had peace. Except she one day suddenly showed up and gleefully presented me with the school's Russian exchange student. This student had been sitting at my table every day for weeks, and I hadn't paid it any mind. Well, because why would I? She was allowed to sit there. But this is when Anna drops the bombshell that this exchange student was A, not a real exchange student, and B, she had been putting her phone on the table each mealtime while having it on speaker with Anna on the other end, silently listening in on my conversations. I remember when she first told me this, and how I didn't believe it. I didn't believe, and a part of me still had a hard time realizing the lengths this woman was going to were real. But it was what she said next that terrified me the most. She said, "I know about the secret messages behind your words. I know what you are up to. And I heard a voice from above that told me that it was my mission in life to keep an eye on you and to make sure you behave." The abuse at school escalated quickly after this. I was harassed and cornered in every classroom and chased around school, and at the same time I got no help. It escalated into something happening one late weekend night. I was sitting in the school's texture room when a guy suddenly burst in and started running towards me, screaming, "What makes you think you can sit here?" He didn't even go to this school. I jumped out of a window and started running towards my dorm, and managed to call 112 in the meantime, which is the emergency number for Sweden, and managed to scream out that I needed help and where I was. I ran towards my dorm, but another guy was waiting for me there, so I ran towards the head building, but a third guy was waiting there. They cornered me and I remembered how scared I was. I thought I was going to die. But then, a light of hope. Blue and red lights from the road. I was saved. I remember how happy I was to see that police officer. Everything would be finally over. And then, he walked up to the girl who orchestrated all of it, Malin, and he greeted her like a friend. Then I knew. I knew that at that moment that he wouldn't save me. I screamed for help and he ignored me. She told him that there was no issue here, and he said he was looking forward to seeing her around town, then left. He left me. He just drove away. The last thing I remember is the back lights of that police car driving away. I woke up the next morning laying on the ground with a huge bump on the side of my head. I don't know what happened. Malin claims they never touched me, and I just passed out when one of the guys grabbed me. But I know better. I know the pain I felt and the huge bump on the side of my head. I called 112 and I called for an ambulance this time. But because of the abuse, I had memory loss and couldn't quite tell the lady what the issue was. But I made a mistake. I told her that I had called 112 the day after, and that a police officer just left me. She got mad, like really, really mad, and told me that I was slandering her co-worker and to only call if I actually needed help, and then she hung up. I was alone again, with no one. Not a single person on my side. I tried to make a police report against Anna and Malin, but the officer had heard about me and deleted my report. It was during this time that I had had enough and thought about ending my own life, so I was forcefully put in a mental health ward, and the stalking didn't stop. Anna had a friend of hers be committed so she could come into the ward as a visitor in order to harass me. When I tried to go to art school again, she had people she had threatened join the same program so they could keep an eye on me. At home, she would have another guy she had threatened to park outside my house a few times a week in order to scare me. And during this, she would also have things stolen from me. Things like shoes and gloves. And according to the people doing the stealing, this was because she had watched a movie where someone steals items and then puts them back to make someone go insane from the harassment. Anna would call me a few times a year, lying about a data collector to get private information out of me, something that took a few years to even catch on to. Because she lived in a big city far away at the time, she constantly forced others to do the stalking for her. Most of them at one point she had given drugs to, and then would get them to do what she wanted by threatening to report them to the police if they wouldn't. Others she just bribed with money or charmed. I have gone for hour-long bus rides where someone admits being there for her sake. Most people are afraid of her because she won't leave them alone, and she will do to them what she does to me, if they don't say yes to her. One girl was roped into standing all dressed in red outside my supermarket. Another girl was also roped into sitting with her car outside my house for hours, a few days a week. All because of the fear of this woman. I learned from a cousin of hers that she affords all of this because she won an art prize for 500,000 SEK at one point. It's why she thinks she's famous. I also learned that most of her biological family has cut contact with her because she has been doing this since she was a teenager. And yet even with that information, no one would listen. When I tell people what she had done to me, people call me the crazy one. I have no history of delusions or of making up tall tales, yet it was so much easier for people to just think I'm crazy. I have even been forcefully medicated at some points with psychosis medication that baffled doctors lamented over not working. Not even my family believes me, something that has forever barred how much trust I can put into the relationship between us. I asked her once why she was doing all of this, and she said, "To punish you." I asked her how long I would need to be punished, and she answered, "For as long as I want." At one point I even considered killing her. I am the kind of person who catches flies alive in a cup and lets them out the window. I have never harmed another human being. I have never been violent, yet at one point felt so desperate for freedom that I would take prison rather than being haunted by Crazy Anna anymore. I was more afraid of her than of any prison. But then it stopped. It just stopped. Still, a year later, I don't know why it stopped. Nothing in her history tells me that she would stop willingly. So I'm convinced that either she has run out of people to threaten into doing her bidding, or something has happened to her. It's possible that one of those people finally reported her and actually got taken seriously. I don't know. Even so, I can't feel relief, not yet. I'm still afraid it will start again, and I have given up all hope of being taken seriously by the police. Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed my video. And if you did, could you please give me virtual hugs by subscribing and clicking that notifications button. I also have a Patreon page and YouTube channel membership if you'd like to support me further. Thank you again for being here. Keep being creepy.